Hi there, my name's Helen. I work for Bailey's Horse Feeds, and thank you to Cliff for having me here to talk to you. Tonight's subject is feeding for recovery after illness or injury. So I think most of us know, with years of perhaps owning horses, at some point, unfortunately, they succumb to injury or illness, which is a bit of a headache for us all. But I'd like to be able to help you a bit on the feeding front, give you some advice, etc. So we've got a few different topics that I'll go through, and hopefully there'll be something for each person out there. And at the end, I've got a little competition just to make things a little bit more interesting. Okay, so kicking off, who am I? So I'm Helen, and I was originally a vet nurse, so I worked in a mixed practice for quite a few years, and then I sort of branched into pharmaceutical sales. And then again branched into the feed industry, which I've been for 18 years. So yes, my job is very hands-on, going to see horses in yards most of the time, and they can be eventers, dressage horses, a very mixed bag, which is good because it gives me lots of experience working with different horses. So most importantly, though, I have my own collection of horses who all have weird and wonderful things wrong with them. So from EMS, Cushing's, Lamy, etc. So I do have some hands-on experience of what it's like to manage and look after ponies that have illness, disease or injury, etc. Okay. So first of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the horse's response to injury and disease. How do they feel, etc. What's the first sort of symptom? I think most of us that are very used to our horses, know our horses well, know as soon as we look over the stable door that day, or we see them in the field standing in a very different position or a different place than they would usually be, which is always very alarming, as we know. So firstly and foremost, obviously, always consult your vet as soon as the horse becomes unwell or succumbs to injury. The sooner it's looked at and treated, the sooner hopefully the healing process will begin. So the horse's body responds to both injury and disease in a similar manner. The immediate visible response of the horse is a depressed appetite. So those that are usually especially very greedy, etc., perhaps they're backing off their feed, something's not quite right. And this is usually the result of pain. Their first thing is, oh, don't want to eat up at all, which is fine. So basically now we've got a lack of appetite, and the body's needs for nutrients to heal often results in weight loss. So the lack of appetite forces the body into what we call a sort of catabolic state. And this is when the horse breaks down its own body tissues to provide energy. And then, of course, because of that, the horse now begins to lose condition and muscle tissue from top line and hind quarters. So unfortunately, it's a downward spiral of the pony horse starts to not look well, lose condition, etc. So we're sort of beginning to play catch up in the recuperation process. So just to give you a little idea, I think this is quite interesting. This is an injured or sick horse versus a normal healthy horse. So in sort of an injured or sick horse, 50% of the calories come from fat stores, and 20% from glycogen stores, and 30% of the calories come from the breakdown of body tissue. Now, in a normal healthy horse, 90% of the calorie requirements come from fat stores within the body, and 5 to 8% from body protein, muscle and mass. So basically, with an injured horse, it takes a lesser percentage of calories from its fat stores. However, the healthy horse takes nearly all its calories requirement from its fat stores. So it's quite a dramatic difference. So the first step here is we need to restore the appetite. Okay, we need to get the horse wanting to eat again. So hopefully now the horse is more willing to eat, we can address the specific nutrient requirements needed for the healing process. As we know, and I can't reiterate enough, the vet should always be the first person you consult if your horse is injured or unwell. If the horse is in pain or has infection, they will obviously administer medication to help with the pain, make the horse comfortable. And then once the horse is more comfortable, the first step to restoring his or her appetite. So this is where I'll be able to give you a little bit of help of how we can get them eating, what they require, etc., to make them on the road for recovery. So feeding the injured horse first and foremost is our forage, okay? Can't emphasize that enough either. Most of us possibly have an idea of how much our horse weighs. Perhaps you've used a weigh bridge recently, or you use a weigh tape, but obviously it's quite important to know roughly what their body weight is. So does my horse need to lose weight? So first of all, we need to assess how the horse is looking at this point. Has it been injured or unwell, but it's quite overweight, and now it's going to be on box rest, not exercising? So we need to sort of have a look at the body condition of the horse in its current state. So if it's a normal horse, we're just wanting to maintain the weight, we'd sort of be wanting a minimum of about 2% of body weight for forage, for their hay consumption per day. So 500 kilo horse needs about 10 kilos a day of hay, which sounds quite a lot. And when you weigh it out, probably be surprised at how much actually it is. But if we are looking at that horse that does need to lose a little bit of weight, we're looking to drop a bit of weight, we'll be working at about 1.5%. Okay, so that would drop it down to about 7.5 kilos daily. Because obviously we want to keep these horses eating. Okay, we want to keep them happy. We don't want to be taking away food from them. So it's important that if we are looking to lose weight, we're just looking at reducing the calories, but fundamentally we still want them to have that occupational therapy of eating and chewing along quite happily, because obviously being on box rest is particularly boring for them. So how, if we wanted to feed that amount of forage for a horse that's we want to lose weight, how can we do it? Okay, so basically we're looking at soaking hay. 6 to 8 hours will make a little bit of difference, but really go for a longer soak if you're really wanting to withdraw the calories as much as possible. So obviously it's a little bit time consuming, it's not much fun in the winter, but by soaking the hay, it reduces the calories massively and significantly, but you're still getting them to eat and chew properly. So talked about how long to soak hay for, the do's and the don'ts for soaking hay. Okay, so what's really important is we change that water every day, because it does leave a sort of murky, horrible brown colour. That should be thrown away after each soak, and fresh water replenished, so that you can soak another hay net sort of thing. And then the other thing which people often do is soak the hay, and then if it's a nice sunny day they tend to hang it up, and of course that's when your bacterial spores have a field day and start multiplying massively, which isn't going to help the situation at all. Okay, so a little bit there on forage, which is the most important thing. As I say, look at the horse, assess the current body condition, and then we can work off a percentage of how much hay to feed on a daily basis. So moving on to the nutritional requirements for the healing horse. What they need to make them better. What is their requirements? So dietary protein supplies the amino acids, building blocks of body proteins, which compromises all the body tissues. So that's including your muscles and your tendons, your ligaments and your bone. So it's really essential, as in the horse's diet is, as in fibre, it's really important that we get the dietary protein into them. And protein, which often gets a bit of a bad name, it is only used as an energy source by the horse's body when all the other sources of energy have been exhausted. This means it does not have any effect on the temperament. So I'm afraid it's a little bit of a myth of, oh, can't give the horse protein because it sends it doolally tap. It's fundamentally important to keep the muscle tone up. And also it's not a numbers game of looking at how much, it's also the quality of ingredient, what makes up that protein source. Vitamins are needed for production of skin, hooves, bone and muscle, and generally a strengthening of the immune system. They also maintain and repair cells, tissues and organs. They convert food into energy and play a large part in the correct functioning of the nervous system and the brain too. So moving on to minerals, all horses need salt. So salt is a requirement. about 10 to 12 grams per 100 kilo of body weight. So that's sort of, a tablespoon of your sort of ponies, etc. And then onto your larger horses, you'd be looking at 2 tablespoons per day. So minerals, all horses need salt, calcium and phosphorus, so to replace the electrolytes, maintain healthy teeth and bones. And then moving on to your fats and your carbohydrates. So this is what they'll be getting from the forage side. These sort of main nutritional property is their ability to generate energy through being metabolized. Okey-doke. So colic, what is it? Okay, so we'll start talking about a few conditions and how we would feed or manage afterwards. So what is colic? I mean, the definition is abdominal pain. As we all know, there's different types of colic. So you've sort of got your impaction colic. So these are caused generally by a blockage in the intestine. Gas-related colic, so you've got build-up of gas in the intestine. Spasmodic, so categorized by an increased intestinal spasms. And then your sand colics, which are pockets in the UK where this happens and the horse ingests sand. So funny enough, I did look into where these pockets were. So I think in East Anglia, there's quite a few, Hampshire, etc. Leicestershire, that's that sort of area as well. Okay. So things to consider after a gas or impaction colic, God forbid your horse has just had one. What do we do from this point? So what probably the first consideration would be is, do we know what caused the impaction? Do we have any idea? Have we suddenly changed our forage suppliers? At the moment, obviously, there's a bit of a problem with hay supply. So a lot of people are having to sort of change around their hay supply, which isn't ideal. So maybe it could be something like that, a change of hay. Dehydration, hydration levels are often one of the most common causes of colic. So make sure they're drinking sufficient amounts of water and using salts or electrolytes daily to make sure you are replenishing their reserves. So horses are big water structures, okay, so we do need to keep them hydrated to avoid these problems. Okay, so going back to the hay, was the hay particularly high in fibre? So when it's more stalky and stemmy, we call it lignified. It can sit in the gut for sort of longer periods of time. Sometimes when you see ponies or horses, they have that sort of like gutty appearance, and that can be that the hay is not particularly digestible and sits in the intestine for quite a long period of time. So it sort of ferments there. Okay, so basically, yeah, it's sort of sitting in the gut for a long period of time, and then it's working really hard to break it down. So something that it might be an idea to source a haylage. It tends to be softer and more digestible than hay. This isn't always the case, but I have to say mostly it does seem to have a little bit more sort of softer feel to it. So yeah, it's important to source a soft, leafy, digestible forage, something that's been harvested earlier on in the season, sort of rather than your sort of second cut, late cut hay. And haylage isn't ideal for gas colics because there's a lot of water obviously in haylage, so it tends to ferment a bit longer and ferment a bit more and sit in the hind gut for a longer period of time, and obviously that's something we're trying to avoid. So try to steer off your haylage if we're talking about recovery from a gas colic. Okay, so feeding considerations, what we need to be thinking about or changing the way we do things, etc. So we've had a gas colic or impaction colic. So we need to be looking at our meal sizes. These should be kept small. We're all aware now that the stomach is actually a relatively small structure against the size of the actual horse in proportion. So always think about the size of the stomach as you're preparing meals, etc. So we certainly don't want to sort of have it over 2/3 full or overload it, etc. The feed often sort of stays around sort of minimum of sort of 30 minutes where it all gets churned up, etc. So it doesn't tend to sit in the stomach for long periods of time. However, some of your sort of more oily diets, it does sort of stay around a little bit more, bit longer in the stomach. So it is important to feed by weight and not by volume. So weigh the feed, use your stop scoop, let's know how much is going in the feed bowl, not just by doing it by eye all the time. So let's do a proper calculation. And this is something I can obviously help with, all the nutritionists at Bailey's. It's no problem at all. I ideally would be going for your lower starch diet. Starch can be a trigger, okay? So we've got very clever at manufacturing these low starch diets now, so they would be beneficial. And also from a starch can exacerbate an excitable temperament. So if we have got a horse on box rest, we're obviously going to make sure that we're able to handle it still. So ideally go for your low starch diet. And then if the horse is overweight or maintaining its weight, consider a balancer. So your balancers are a little bit like the good old days of Slim Fast. So they've got all the nutrients the horse or pony needs for recovering, getting better, etc. However, the calorie content is quite small, so you don't have to worry about it. It's basically a way of giving them the nutrients that they need to get better and function without piling on more pounds or additional calories. So if the horse is underweight, we could consider a fibre blend diet or high oil supplements such as Outshine. So Outshine is a way to really pack the calories in small meals, which is really useful to top up if the horse is a little bit underweight, but needing the small meal sizes. And of course, consider a pre and probiotic sort of to replenish bacterial population, okay, because it's been disturbed, it's been sort of messed around, horse has been unwell, and we need to sort of keep the gut functioning well. So we need to have a look at a pre and probiotic to get things settled in the gut. So moving on to management considerations after a gas or impaction colic. So as I say, I can't reiterate enough, firstly, always consult your vet, okay. And then make sure your horse is drinking water, going back to the hydration. Buckets can be more reliable with regards to monitoring water intake rather than the automatic feeders. So we can just make sure that horse, we have that peace of mind that horse is getting enough water into its system. And then consider offering warm water when the outside temperature is freezing. So when we had that really cold weather a couple of weeks ago, all the tanks were frozen up. And we also tend to go along and chip away to break up all the ice. But ideally, by offering them a nice warm drink, obviously not boiling, but warm enough, they often like that. Nobody likes drinking freezing water. So perhaps think about not just breaking up the ice, actually give them a warm drink and see if they take it to encourage hydration. And keep the horse mobile. I mean, ultimately, this is something to talk to the vet about. But leading out in hand if necessary, because this is sort of to keep the hind gut mobile, okay, all the time they're standing still, it's sort of not moving, so they do actually need that physical movement of walking around, being led out. But as I said, that's something you need to talk to the vet about, post-operative care or whatever treatment that the horse has had. And then consider adding speedy beet or fibre beet into the diet to help with hydration levels and palatability. So these are the diets that you obviously be adding water into soaking diets. The only thing that I would stress is obviously with the gas colic, I possibly avoid your beet because it can ferment a bit. And obviously that's something we're trying to avoid with our gas colics. Okay. So post-colic surgery. Firstly, consult your vet, and then considerations. This depends on the situation. So hopefully at this point, perhaps you'll be speaking to your vet about what happens next, and maybe we'll be involved, and we can sort of put a plan together so everybody's happy and knows what we're doing. So, I mean, this very much depends on the situation, and as we know, each case is individual. So has there been a large part of the digestive system removed? Has there been a torsion or a section? If so, where? So there's lots of ifs and buts and maybes, and it's something we would be wanting to talk to you and the vet about if you were sort of seeking our advice with regards to feeding. But it may be necessary to steer clear of long fibre, avoiding any extra strain or stress to the digestive system. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is make it harder for the horse to get functioning properly again. So that's something else we could talk about. But we have alternatives of sort of short chopped fibre, things like our light chaff, etc. So there are ways around it. But the key is giving the horse a digestible diet with all the essential nutrients for repair and recovery to get the horse sorted again and back to full health. That's our aim. So when we look at changing the feed, obviously people often say to me, oh, I tried this feed and it didn't work. And you sort of say, how long have you fed it? And they say a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, that really isn't long enough. So we sort of, I always say to people, if we're changing a diet, it can take sort of 4 to 6 weeks to see a physical difference. So your weight gain or your weight loss or your coat shine, if you're feeding out shine, okay. So it's not an overnight thing. But obviously, I cannot stress enough, make any feed changes gradually. So we're sort of talking 14 days as a minimum would be absolutely ideal. Nothing worse than changing feed directly or forage, to be honest with you. As I say, I know it's a difficult one because hay is short at the moment, but do tend to see people sort of changing onto haylage when they're travelling a horse, etc. So you have to kind of think about these, put a little bit of thought into these things. So we'll be looking at 14 days minimum to change a feed. And each case is individual. As I said, we very much want to be involved at this point with the vet, etc., about giving you a plan forward, because they're all individual and they all have different needs, etc. So we would advise you to get in touch. Just facts here. So underweight horses tend to have a slower healing process than horses of moderate body condition. So if your horse is already a little bit poor or a bit underweight, unfortunately, it's going to take that additional time to get it looking well again. But then on the other side of the coin, overweight horses put unnecessary strain on their joints. So if they're going to be standing in, having on box rest for long periods of time, that's not ideal either. But this is something, as I say, by soaking the hay, etc. There's ways we can help with this. So just wanted to have a look at a couple of our forage replacers, because obviously because of the hay situation in the country, we have got alternatives that will help. The light chaff is a good one because obviously very short chop fibre, so it gets them chewing well and producing saliva. And you can do like for like in hay quantities. So that's a good one to have up your sleeve. And then obviously your fibre beet, which obviously you add additional water to. It's slow release energy. It's ideal for fussy feeders. The fibre is very digestible. So with all these colics, obviously that would be something to really think about. As I say, it's all been key of offering the most digestible fibre possible. So those are a couple of alternatives that you could be adding in, or if your hay source is low at this point. And then feeding tips. So horses really can be put off by having huge amounts of feed in front of them when they're feeling unwell. Rather like us, there's nothing worse than you really don't feel like eating and there's a big plate of food in front of you. So that's something else to consider. So we could try, to get them eating, we could try adding succulents, such as apples or carrots, to make the feed a bit more palatable. Certainly with your EMS ponies or horses, perhaps be sensible with the amount that you're giving them. But obviously we've got to remember that there's a huge water content in your apples and carrots, etc. But just go easy on them. But it might be a way of tempting them to start eating properly again. And then we have garlic supplement with natural garlic oil. And this can be added to feeds to hide the smell and taste of medicine, etc., which obviously aren't very nice. And a lot of them quite clever about knowing it's actually in the feed. And adding warm water to the feed can appeal to some horses. So even the juice of speedy beet, sometimes they quite like. I think some of our nutritionists have recommended the herbal tea bags like chamomile tea, just sort of putting the juice on that onto the feed or the hay supply, just to get their appetite stimulated. And I think the feedback was that it did make quite a bit of difference. So you could perhaps use mint tea or chamomile tea. as I said, so herbs as well, full of antioxidants, massively beneficial. And adding warm water, it can just be just a little bit of warm water, just encourages them. Using concentrated sources of nutrients will help to provide a balanced diet. Okay, so this is where our balance is. If they're being really fussy, we could perhaps top up with a balancer so we know they're still getting the nutrients. Unfortunately, we can't get them eating the large quantities of feed split up into lots of little meals, but perhaps we can just add a bit of balancer in just to make sure they're getting those key nutrients if they really are inappetent. And make sure the feed bucket is in a comfortable position. So, for example, if you did have an injury to the front leg, they'll be putting quite a lot of strain on it by eating with their head down, so it might be necessary to raise the bucket. Just these little things can help. So I just wanted to show you our two balancers. So there's the low carb balancer, okay, which is low calorie feed, as I said, very low calorie, low sugar, low starch, nice and safe. So this will give the horse all the necessary nutrients without the calorie source. So you'd have that peace of mind, what was going in the bucket was everything they needed alongside their fibre and forage. And then the performance balancer, obviously, as well. So that would be an option. Okay, and then moving on, we have, so these are calorie feeds, a little bit higher in calories. Well, the Meadow Sweet's about 10 megajoules. Okay, so it's low starch, low sugar, very safe, nice fibre blend. And then the Ease and Excel, which is an incredibly popular diet. It's a little bit higher in energy and calories. Well, as we know, energy equals calories, okay? So this is about 13 megajoules. Low starch, ideal for horses with ulcers, excitable temperament, but needing the condition, okay. And then back to oil. Oil is an excellent source of non-heating calories. So nice, slow release calories going in there. And you're feeding small amounts here. You'll be feeding by the mug load. So that's between 1 and 3 mugs a day would be beneficial. And it's a way of really getting it in small feeds. But just if you have a surgical colic and there's been problems with the ileum, etc., we would want you to consult us because oil might not be the way forward. So what to feed horses, a bit of a summary here. So ideally to go for your low starch, your high fibre blends, check you're feeding the correct amount. Okay, so going back to your weight, not volume, and feed little and often. I mean, some of these horses, you know, if they are on box rest, or they've had a bad time, we're looking at 4 or 5 feeds a day. Okay, so small feeds, little and often. Make sure that the diet is balanced. So sort of we're trying to encourage people to come away from a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We're looking to make it balanced, okay? If for example, they do need a calorie source, but not the whole amount like Ease and Excel, we could just top up with a balancer as well. So it's possible that we could use a combination of diets as well to make sure that the diet is fully balanced. Add salt, I've spoken about salt. And then obviously once they're back working, etc., we could look at electrolytes, but I think we're a step away from there still. And consult Bailey's Nutritional team, call us anytime. We've got lots of information on the websites, etc. So just be in touch or ask questions a bit later on is absolutely fine. And then this is where the excitement begins. So this is, I've just done a little bit of competition, just for a bit of fun, really. But I thought there's probably lots of horses out there, nice and deserving of this. So has your horse proved to be a fighter that deserves a bag of Bailey's feed and a tub of treats? I might even throw in some chocolates for the owner who's probably had a bad time as well. So it's just a bit of fun, but to enter, just like my Helen Gordon Bailey's Horse Feeds page and send me a message with a photo of your horse and pony with a message saying why he or she deserves to win. It's just a little bit of fun, but if they've come back from an illness or injury and been through the wars, just a little story would be nice. Okay. And then just to add, if you want me to come and do a yard visit or talks for your riding club or pony club, boot camps, clinics, demos, etc., it's all free, no obligation. So please, please, please give me a shout. Okay. And on to any questions. And thank you very much for listening.